She waited outside the post office for 3 days, until a quiet rancher took her by the hand and said, "Let's go." The morning was dry and cold, with the kind of silence that made dust echo against wooden buildings. The town of Dry Creek was small, just a crooked main street, a saloon, a church, and the old post office where everyone passed but no one lingered, except her. She sat on the edge of the wooden steps, wrapped in a faded shawl that once might have been blue. Her dress was torn at the hem, boots cracked at the soles. Beside her rested a small leather suitcase, scuffed and woodlanded like her. In her lap, folded and unfolded 100 times, was a crumpled letter. No one knew her name. She hadn't spoken much, only asked once, on the first day, if the stagecoach from Abilene had already passed. The boy at the post office said yes. She nodded, sat down, and hadn't moved since. 3 days passed. The townsfolk started to whisper, "Maybe she's waiting for someone who ain't comin'. Looks like she ran from something or someone. No husband, no ring, just sitting there like a ghost." Children were told not to stare. Women crossed the street. Men tipped their hats politely, then kept walking. Even the preacher glanced her way once before closing the church doors early that Sunday. She didn't cry, not once. At night, she slept sitting up, her back against the wall. A dog barked once and ran off. The wind kicked up red dust, and still she waited. Her fingers traced the envelope as if the ink held promises it never fulfilled. The sheriff passed on the second day, looked at her, and spat on the ground. "I can't sleep out here forever, miss." She didn't answer, just looked toward the edge of town, as if expecting a figure to emerge on the horizon. But nobody came. On the third morning, she moved for the first time, only to place her suitcase behind her so people wouldn't trip over it. Her eyes were heavy, not with sleep, but with something older, disappointment, hunger, maybe shame. Then he appeared. He didn't arrive with thunder or dust or attention. No one noticed him at first. A tall man on a dark horse, shoulders broad beneath a worn duster, hat pulled low. He dismounted slowly, tied his reins at the hitching post, and walked toward the general store. Didn't glance at her, didn't speak. She didn't notice him either until she did. Every day he'd come in early to sell hay or pick up salt. Always silent, always alone. Folks called him the Quiet Rancher, though no one remembered his name. Just that he'd fought in the war, lost someone after, and never spoke unless he had to. That evening, as the light grew softer and her eyes heavier, she finally looked at him. He was standing across the street, holding a bag of flour in one hand, reins in the other, staring, not rudely, not with pity, just seeing her. She lowered her eyes, and for a moment the wind stilled. He didn't speak, just turned and walked away, his boots crunching gravel. But something had shifted, because for the first time since she arrived, someone hadn't looked through her. He had looked at her, and tomorrow she'd still be waiting, but not just for a ride, for something she didn't know how to name. The morning sun bled slowly over Dry Creek, painting everything in pale orange, but offering no warmth. She was still there. Same shawl, same suitcase, same silence. The dust clung to her clothes now like it had claimed her, made her part of the street, the step, the town that refused to speak. But people noticed. They always did, eventually. 4 days, someone whispered inside the saloon. 3.5, corrected the barber. She got here just before sundown Friday. That makes it worse. Sunday came and went. Ain't no one looking for her. The sheriff watched from his window, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. He didn't hate her. He didn't know her. But to him, she was a problem waiting to happen. Folks who don't move, don't speak, don't explain. They carried trouble like dust in their coat pockets. He stepped out, spurs ringing lightly, and approached. "You got family in this town?" he asked. She shook her head. "You waiting on someone?" A pause. "He said he'd meet me here." "He who?" She looked down at her hands, folded tight. "A man who wrote me a letter." The sheriff sighed through his nose. "Miss, I don't mean to be unkind, but men say a lot of things in letters." Her eyes didn't waver. He said he had a small ranch near Red Hollow, that he needed help, that he'd come. The sheriff scratched his jaw. Red Hollow was 40 miles west. Plenty of land, plenty of liars. He leaned in a little. You ain't in trouble, are you? No, sir. You ain't bringing it neither. No, sir. He straightened, hesitated, then tipped his hat. Well, we'll see. He walked away. Behind the window of the dry goods store, the clerk's wife watched the whole thing. And later, she'd say to her friend, "That girl's a fool. Ain't got sense to go home." Her friend would nod. "No home left, I reckon." In truth, she didn't have one. What she'd run from wasn't a place, but a man who made promises with fists and apologies with whiskey. The letter had arrived like a rope thrown to a drowning woman. She took it, took the risk, and here she was. But no one knew that. They only saw a woman sitting in the dust, waiting for a man who never came, and no one offered help, except, and for old Tom, the former preacher's brother, who passed by with his mule cart and slowed for a second. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He reached behind him and tossed a bruised apple into her lap. "Don't let this town harden your heart, girl," he muttered before moving on. She looked at the apple, then at the street, then at the hitching post across from her. The quiet rancher had been there again. She'd seen him, just like before, bag of oats, long pause, same eyes, no words. But this time, when their eyes met, he nodded. It wasn't a smile, not even close, but it was something, recognition, maybe even permission. And in a town full of silent judgment, that one nod had made her feel human again. She held the apple tightly and didn't eat it. She just needed to know someone else saw her, even if he never said a word. The next morning, Dry Creek was blanketed in low mist, the kind that made outlines blur and movement seem slower. She was still there, shawl pulled tight, suitcase dustier, letter folded neatly in her lap like scripture. But something had changed. She looked up more. Her eyes scanned the street now, not just in hope, but in search of him. He came at the same time each day, mounted on a tall, dark gelding, moving with the deliberate calm of a man who had no one waiting and nothing left to prove. His name wasn't known by most, not because it was a secret, but because he didn't bother correcting the versions. People told. Some called him Daniel, others said Eli, some just said the one with the scar. She noticed it today for the first time, cut across his jaw, like a half-forgotten story. He dismounted as always, nodded to the store. Clark tied his horse and walked inside. 5 minutes later, he came out with oats and salt in his saddlebags. But this time, he didn't mount right away. He stood still, just across the street, watching her again. There was no malice in his eyes, no curiosity, just something steady, grounded, like he was reading her, or waiting to see what she'd do, and she did nothing, not yet. She looked down instead, heart pounding from nothing more than being seen. Around her, the world moved. Children ran past with sticks for swords. A man hammered a new board onto the saloon porch. An old woman sold quilts no one bought. But none of them noticed the thread quietly tightening between the woman on the steps and the man who watched. The town's silence, once suffocating, now felt like the space between two heartbeats. Something was building. She felt it, in the stillness, the way the air held its breath when he looked her way. Later that day, 2 young cowhands joked near the well. "Reckon that rancher's got his eye on the dust girl. Wouldn't blame him. She's got that quiet kind of pretty, like a wildflower you find growing in a place flowers ain't supposed to be." She heard it, and it didn't make her blush. It made her ache, because she didn't feel like a flower. She felt like a weed, rootless, tossed from place to place, trying to grow in soil that always spat her back out. Until now, that night, she didn't sleep much. Not from cold, but from something else. Expectation, memory, the way. He had stood just a little longer today, before mounting his horse and riding off. Before leaving, he had done something else too. He tipped his hat, a small gesture, a quiet one, but for a woman who had waited 3 days in full view and been treated like shadow, It meant more than words. She unfolded the letter. Again, read the first line aloud, for no one but herself. If you get here and I'm not, wait 3 days. I'll come find you. Tears welled in her eyes, not from hope, but fear. Because what if she'd waited for the wrong man? What if the one meant for her had already seen her and hadn't walked away, only watched, waiting for her to move first? The fourth morning arrived wrapped in gold and silence, the kind of sunrise that made shadows stretch long before. The heat came. She was still there, and so was her letter, but the resolve in her eyes had dimmed. The boy at the post office didn't even greet her this time. The preacher passed without looking. The town had decided. If she was still waiting, it was her own fault. No one owed her more than silence, but she wasn't waiting anymore. She was deciding. Her legs ached, her stomach grumbled. Her pride had dried up somewhere between day 2 and yesterday's nod. She was no longer a mystery, just a problem too quiet to be solved. She rose, slow and unsteady, brushed off her skirt and picked up her suitcase, then paused. She dropped it again, sat back down, folded her arms, and wept. Not loud, not begging, just silent, shoulder-shaking grief. The kind that only happens when you've run out of ways to be strong. She pressed the letter to her face. Her lips moved. A prayer, a goodbye. No one heard, but he saw the quiet rancher had come early this time. No one noticed him ride in. No one heard the soft clop of hooves or saw the glint of his rifle resting behind his saddle. He dismounted slower than usual, but not because he was tired. He had made up his mind. Across the street, she hadn't noticed him yet. Her head was bowed, her tears dripping onto the dusty step. He crossed the street. The town paused, not in noise, but in rhythm. People felt something change without knowing why. The saloon door stopped swinging. A dog barked once and fell silent. And then she felt a shadow fall over her. Looked up. There he was. He didn't ask her name, didn't question her story. He reached down, steady as a stone, and extended his hand. "Let's go," he said. 2 words. Quiet. Certain. She stared at him for what felt like a lifetime. Eyes swollen, lips parted, hope fighting with fear. She shook her head once, almost without meaning to. He didn't move. His hand didn't tremble. She looked down at it. Rough, weathered, real. Then she placed her fingers in his palm. He pulled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing at all. The letter slipped from her hand. He picked it up, folded it neatly, and tucked it in 2. Her suitcase without asking, and without a word more, he turned toward his horse. She followed. No one stopped them. No one dared. The sheriff watched from his porch. He didn't tip his hat, but he didn't interfere. The townsfolk watched the 2 figures ride away, her side saddle holding the saddle horn like a thread to this new life. Him silent as ever, but not alone anymore, and in that dust-choked street, something strange happened. For the first time in 4 days, people looked ashamed because it hadn't taken a preacher or a sheriff or a neighbor to do the right thing, just a quiet man and a hand. The trail out of Dry Creek twisted through low hills and dry gullies, the land turning wilder the farther they rode. No words passed between them. Just the creak of saddle leather, the wind pressing against the tall grass, and the steady rhythm of hooves. She didn't know where he was taking her, but she didn't ask. She was too tired to fear. By midday, the town was a memory behind them, swallowed by dust and distance. The sun was high, the sky blindingly blue, and her hands ached from clutching the saddle horn. Once, the horse stumbled on a rut and she nearly slipped, but his hand caught her waist, steadying her. He didn't speak, just held her, for a moment longer than needed, then let go. They arrived late in the afternoon. His ranch was tucked between 2 hills, hidden by a stand of pines and the bend of a dry creek bed. It wasn't large, but it was clean. A single-story wooden cabin, a barn with peeling paint, and a corral holding a single old mule and a few chickens scratching at dust. She slid off the horse awkwardly, legs trembling. He offered no help, just waited as she steadied herself. She looked at the house, curtains drawn, door closed, chimney cold. He walked ahead and pushed open the door. She hesitated before stepping in. Inside, it smelled of dry wood and ash, a simple table, 2 chairs, a cold hearth. No photographs, no clutter, just space, silence, solitude. He set down her suitcase gently beside the doorway, then moved to the hearth, knelt, and began stacking kindling with quiet efficiency. She stood near the door, unsure whether she should move or sit or speak. He struck a match. The flame caught. The warmth was immediate, not just the fire, but the act itself, someone building light instead of walking away. He stood again and looked at her. "You can have the bed." She blinked. "Where will you sleep?" He gestured to the floor beside the fire. "I've had worse." She opened her mouth to protest but closed it again. She nodded. He stepped outside and returned with a loaf of bread, a jar of honey, and 2 tin cups of well water. They sat at the table without words. She ate slowly. Her stomach cramped from hunger, but she was too aware of the silence to eat fast. He didn't watch her, didn't ask questions, just ate his share, then stood and washed the plates. In the basin with practiced rhythm. As dusk fell, the cabin turned golden with firelight. She stared at the flame, feeling the weight of her breath begin to ease. Before he lay down on the floor, he placed a folded blanket on the bed. She touched it with trembling fingers. It smelled faintly of pine and horses and smoke. That night, she lay stiff in the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. She could hear him breathing beside the fire, slow, even safe. She thought of the letter, of the man who wrote it and never showed, and of this one who never wrote a word, but had spoken more with his silence than anyone else ever had with promises. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, slept without fear. The days began to fold into one another at the ranch, like pages of a book with no title. She didn't ask how long she was allowed to stay. He didn't say. But every morning, the fire was lit before she woke. Bread warmed on the pan, water drawn fresh from the well, and always quiet. He worked the fields in the early light, tending a broken fence or hauling bales of hay from the barn. She stayed close to the house at first, washing linens, sweeping the porch, folding the same blanket again and again just to feel useful. Her presence was still tentative, like a song she was afraid to sing aloud. Sometimes he left before sunrise. She'd watch his figure disappear between the hills, a tall silhouette on horseback, fading into the dawn. Each time he returned, her chest loosened slightly. He always came back, but her dreams still hadn't let her go. At night, she cried out, not always loud, sometimes just a gasp, sometimes only a whimper muffled by the pillow, but he heard. She knew he did. He never came to the door, never asked in the morning, but she'd find little things placed near her bed after, a small candle, a cup of warm tea, a folded flannel shirt when the wind howled harder against the windows. One night, after a dream left her sobbing into the blanket, she crept to the main room and found him still awake, sitting by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, even strokes. She froze. He looked up. Their eyes met. No words, just space. She turned back toward the room, but paused. I never asked your name, she said. He placed the knife down, wiped the blade clean. Calder, he said quietly. She nodded. I'm Ruth. He nodded once, then picked the knife up again, and something fragile and invisible shifted in that moment. 2 names had been spoken aloud, and the world hadn't broken. If anything, it had grown smaller, more bearable. The next morning, she did something bold. She planted marigolds, just a small patch near the porch. The soil was dry and unwelcoming, but she worked it anyway. Kneeling in her faded dress, hands in the earth, she looked up once to see him watching from the field, not approaching, just watching. She kept planting. That night, there was stew for dinner, her doing. He didn't say anything, but ate every bite. Then, as he stood to clear the dishes, he paused. "Marigolds take root easy," he said, "even in poor dirt." She looked up. "They don't need much," he added. "Just someone not afraid to plant 'em." She didn't smile, but she breathed deeper. And after he went to bed, she sat on the porch a little longer, watching the dark. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was beginning. The wind had a different smell that morning. Drier, sharper, like metal and distance. Ruth noticed it the moment she stepped out to fetch water. The chickens were quiet. Even the old mule seemed uneasy, shifting its weight and staring toward the ridge. Something was coming. She turned slowly toward the hills. Dust rose in the distance, not from wind, but hooves. She walked back to the porch and stood very still, one hand resting on the post. Calder stepped out behind her, already holding his rifle. He didn't say a word. 4 riders crested the far hill, black silhouettes against the rising sun. As they drew closer, their faces came into view, weathered, sharp-eyed men, dusty coats, guns on their hips, the kind of men who didn't knock when they came. Calling, one of them, older, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his temple to his ear, pulled ahead and stopped just shy of the fence. "You the one running this place?" he asked. Calder didn't answer. He just stood on the porch, rifle at ease but not forgotten. "We're looking for a woman," the man said. "Dark hair, about so tall. Came through Dry Creek. Last week. Said she was waiting on someone." Ruth's blood turned to ice. The man scanned the porch, eyes resting on her. "You—" She didn't speak. He clicked his tongue. "You left without saying goodbye. That ain't polite." Calder stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere," he said. His voice quiet but steel-laced. The man gave a slow smile. "That right? She yours now?" Calder didn't blink. "She's not anyone's, but she's staying here." The air snapped tight. The other riders shifted. Hands hovered near belts. Even the horses sensed it, hooves pawing dirt, nostrils flaring. Ruth could barely breathe. Then the man laughed. "Suit yourself, rancher. But women who run usually run twice. And when they do, they leave trouble behind." He turned his horse with a sharp pull. "We'll be watching. You change your mind, or she does. We'll be close." The riders moved on, the dust rising again behind them like a threat. With no name, Calder watched until they were nothing more than shadows. Then he turned to Ruth. "You all right?" She nodded. That was him, the one who wrote the letter. Calder didn't flinch. He lied in it. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Next time they come, I won't be talking first." She didn't ask what that meant. She just stepped off the porch and walked to the garden, hands trembling as she knelt to touch the marigolds. They were still alive. And so was she. But for the first time since she'd arrived, she realized something simple and terrifying. This wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about choosing to stay. The sun was high the next day when they returned. This time, and there were 6 of them, riders lined up in a crescent just beyond the corral, their horses sweating, their eyes narrow. They didn't dismount. They didn't call out. They just sat, watching the house, waiting. Inside the cabin, Ruth paced near the hearth, and her hands twisting the hem of her apron. Calder sat at the table, cleaning the barrel of his rifle like it was any other morning. "They won't just ride away," she whispered. "No," he said, calm. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." She turned toward him. "You don't know what kind of man he is, what they'll do." "I've seen men like him before," Calder said. "In war, in towns where law didn't matter. They show up thinking the world owes them something, that no one will stop them." He stood, loaded a shell, and snapped the rifle shut. "They only keep going if no one stands in their way." Outside, the lead rider, same man from before, the one with the scar, finally nudged his horse forward. He stopped just short of the fence, his voice raised enough to carry, "You still playin' protector, rancher?" Calder stepped out onto the porch. "I ain't playin'." The wind carried his voice like a warning shot. "She ran off with money," the man lied. "Left a ranch in Kansas half-starved. Ain't right to let a thief hide out here." Ruth opened the door behind Calder, her voice steady. I left with bruises, not money. The man smirked. Tell your story to someone who cares. I just did. He tensed. You really want to start something over her? Calder took one slow step down from the porch. No, I'm here to end it. The other riders shifted again. Two reached for their holsters. Then, from the tree line to the east, movement. The men is watching. 3 neighbors. A rancher Calder had helped repair a fence, the old preacher's son, and the barber from Dry Creek. They stood at a distance, but their message was clear. The quiet rancher wasn't alone. The scarred man cursed under his breath. His fingers twitched near his belt, but he didn't draw. He looked once more at Ruth. She ain't worth it. Calder answered. Then why ride all this way? Silence. Then the man turned his horse with a bitter jerk of the reins. Don't matter, he spat. This place won't hold her. But even as they rode away, something in their formation faltered. Because they hadn't just been refused, they'd been shamed, and the one who shamed them hadn't needed to raise his voice, just his rifle and his hand. That evening, Calder sat on the porch, oiling the rifle again. Ruth brought him a tin cup of coffee and sat beside him. I thought I'd have to keep running forever, she said. You don't, he answered. She looked at him. Why did you help me? He stared out toward the hills, voice low. Because you waited, and no one should wait that long for someone to care. She didn't respond, just leaned against his shoulder, and for the first time in her life, the silence wasn't empty, it was full. The days that followed were quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence. This time, it was full of warmth. Ruth no longer tiptoed through the house like a guest. She moved with purpose. She planted herbs near the porch, mended an old curtain, swept dust from corners no one had touched in years. Calder never said anything, but sometimes she caught him watching with a look that wasn't quite surprise, but something softer, something like peace. One morning, she found the letter again, creased and worn, left by her suitcase near the door. She had almost forgotten it. She held it in her hands for a long time. It felt heavy now, not because of the paper, but because of what it meant, who she had been when she arrived, and what she had believed about herself. That her only worth came from being chosen, that the man who wrote that letter had been her last hope, that she didn't have a future if no one claimed her, but Calder hadn't chosen her from a letter. He hadn't promised her anything. He had simply stayed. That night, as they ate together at the little table, she finally asked what had been weighing on her. Do you want me to go? He looked up from his stew, calm and unreadable. No, she took a breath. Then why haven't you asked me to stay? He set his spoon down. Because you need to decide, not me. She stared at him. I already did, she whispered. He didn't speak, but something in his shoulders eased. She smiled, faint but real. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to grow something, even in poor soil. He nodded once, then reached into the pocket of his coat. He pulled out a packet of seeds, sunflowers, held it out to her. For the fence line, he said. Her hands trembled as she took them. It wasn't a ring, it wasn't a proposal, but it was something deeper. Permission, belonging. Later, as dusk painted the hills in gold, Ruth stood on the porch holding the letter one last time. She walked to the fire pit out back and fed the paper to the flame. It burned fast, curling, blackening, vanishing into ash. Behind her, Calder was splitting wood. The steady crack of the axe, the rhythm of a man at peace with labor, filled the air like music. She turned to him, arms crossed, smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. He stopped, wiped his brow, met her gaze. What? He asked. She shrugged. Just watching. Why? She walked toward him, slow and certain. Because I don't need to wait anymore. He didn't move, but when she reached for his hand, he took it. No words, just warmth. And that night, 2 chairs sat by the fire instead of one. The morning arrived wrapped in gold and wind, carrying the smell of earth and something tender. Ruth rose before the sun finished its climb. The cabin was still, no clatter, no fire, no voice, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of breath. She stepped outside barefoot, hugging her shawl. The porch boards creaked softly beneath her. Her gaze moved to the fence line where the sunflower sprouts had broken through. Small green fingers reaching for light. Against all odds, they were growing. Behind her, Calder appeared, silent as always, with 2 steaming cups in hand. He handed her one, their fingers brushing briefly. The gesture no longer startled her. It warmed her, steady and familiar. They stood there for a while, side by side, watching the land. This was the rhythm now. No ceremony, no declarations. Just 2 people who understood that being seen, really seen, was more precious than being praised. Later that morning, Ruth took down her old suitcase from the shelf. She hadn't opened it in weeks. Dust clung to the edges. Inside, she found the last object she hadn't yet touched, a square of faded linen embroidered with her mother's initials. She pressed it to her lips, then laid it across the foot of the bed. It was a final act, quiet, absolute. She wasn't leaving. That evening, Calder brought her to a drawer near the hearth. Inside was a wooden box, worn at the edges. He opened it slowly and let her look inside. A photograph, its edges curled from time. A young woman with wide, laughing eyes. A tiny pair of baby booties wrapped in a handkerchief. A military medal polished thin. "My wife," he said, "gone before the child came." The child didn't stay long either. Ruth looked at the box for a long time, then looked at him. "How long did you keep this closed?" He shrugged. "Longer than I planned, shorter than I deserved." She didn't try to comfort him. She simply reached for his hand and held it. They sat by the fire that night until the flames grew lazy and the shadows stretched long. There were no more questions left between them, just understanding. In the days that followed, things shifted in ways so small they could barely name them. Calder began clearing out the side room, sweeping, sanding, muttering softly about new shelves. Ruth started sewing curtains for the windows and humming when she worked. He never asked what tune. She never said. They built something, word by word, glance by glance, chore by chore. A life. One quiet afternoon, she found him on the porch, sharpening an old horseshoe. She sat beside him, watching the land. He turned to her. "I was thinking about building a second chair for the fire, with arms." She smiled. "One with arms sounds nice." He studied her face for a beat longer than usual. "You're not waiting anymore?" he said. She nodded. "No, I've already arrived." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Later that night, they stood in the doorway together, watching the last of the light fall across the sunflower shoots. They had roots now, and so did she. The silence between them, once heavy, once aching, was now filled with breath. Wood smoke and the sound of 2 people who had nothing left to prove, just the will to stay.
If this story touched something quiet in your heart, if you've ever waited too long for kindness, or found unexpected peace in someone's silence, tell us in the comments below. Your words matter here. And if you'd like more stories that remind us that dignity, love, and redemption still exist in the quiet corners of the world, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us.